Sometimes things happen during the policy period. And that's the first kind of like stage, not for every policy, but for a lot of policies, something happens during that policy period. Yeah, so something happens during the policy. So what is that?
A claim.
A claim. Welcome to the fifth phase of the life of an insurance policy, the claim. So Leanne, you prompted this, so tell us about it. What happens?
Look, I think, again, this is good client engagement and staying awake. And it's one of the things that I talk to clients about all the time is that, every client probably thinks they're never going to get one. This is just so you can sleep easy at night, all of those different things. But things go wrong. They can go wrong quickly. And most claims I see, you can afford and see coming. You can underwrite around insolvency, etc. But event-driven litigation, regulatory, lots of things you can't see coming.
Is it necessarily a claim?
No, not necessarily. And that's what I always tell my clients is I don't believe prudent insureds get punished. As in, call us, let's speak to the market, let's speak to the underwriters, come to us for advice. Anything that's happening that you think is coming into the D&O world or you think might come into the D&O world, let's talk about the bond restructuring you're doing. Call me up, I will give you advice. If you're having some layoffs, call us up. Let's talk about it. We can give you advice. Most brokers have great claims and legal teams that can just talk a client through what they see go wrong in those processes. So, and I don't believe there is, an area where a prudent insured gets punished in this world. I can come to the market and say, look, they notified 2 or 3 things last year, but as you can see, they aren't anything. They're now closed. But a client that can communicate claims early before it is a claim, I think is a golden client. Because actually, I think the biggest problem the market has with claims is late notification. And that is something that always is putting us and clients on the back foot, late notification. So if you can show that a client is engaged, is thinking about their exposure, is managing it, and is actively communicating and taking advice on it, I think that's a great golden place to be.
Robert, just in the previous stage, during the policy period, you admitted that your life is easier than Leanne's, but in that fifth stage, it sounds like actually it might be more complicated because you're one step behind, and yet these late notifications to the market that you've engaged with are equally important. So how do you actually kind of like stay tuned with like all these notifications that may or may not evolve into claims, but which the underwriter, such as Ellie, is dying to hear about in due course?
Sure. So quickly, the admission was in relation to invoicing only. So, no, joking aside. So look, 2 things, right? Is it a circumstance, or maybe even to Leanne's point, is it information only, right? That a prudent insured, wishes to make his or her markets aware of, right? So then, is it a circumstance? If it's not, is it a claim? And that's really that rapport, that discussion with the retail broker about what ought to be notified, subject to the terms and conditions of the policy. What I would say is that you then have, in my experience, 2 batches of clients, those that like to disclose and are very comfortable with that process, and that there are those that perhaps take a bit more of an aggressive tact on its litigation. You knew that this sector has 25% of all securities class actions as an example. It's in the public domain. So there are some differences in the client, in my experience, in the client profile about how they approach notification. Whatever that is, they do expect the broker to be engaged, and that's the whole value chain. So the wholesale and the retail broker involved in the conversation about what we need to notify, and then the process once the notification is made.
Eddie, from your perspective, what happens in your world as an underwriter when our claims unit led by Owen Dacey, they receive a notification? So what happens from an underwriter standpoint?
Initially, the reality is not a lot happens from the underwriting standpoint. There's absolutely a conversation between usually myself and Owen. If it's my client, we'd be having a conversation just to understand. I've got the backstory. I know who the client is. I've met the client in lots of instances. I've done the research. I understood the risk that we were stepping into. So it's a conversation with Owen just to update him on that. He wouldn't necessarily have awareness of who all our clients are until that notification comes in. So it's a conversation around that. It's a conversation around if this is something that we maybe foresaw coming, or as Leanne was saying, in lots of instances, you can't foresee these issues coming up. And so it's a conversation then with Owen around what understanding we have of the client, who they are, their risk profile. And then Owen, on his side, he's an absolute expert in these. So he will take that information away. He'll take it away with the notification, and kind of compared to ones he's seen before, he may know the lawyers involved, he may know how they operate, he may understand the direction that this is likely to go in. And so he will then look on his side to begin opening a claims file, looking at kind of what kind of notification are we talking about here? Is this very much a circumstance where the client's very prudent and we have 3 or 4 of these a year on clients with these, and actually it's nothing to worry about at this stage, and it very much is just a FYI, and we need to keep an eye on it, and they'll let us know when they've got more information, or actually is it something that he needs to take more immediate action on? And he's an expert in this space, and he can very much take an opinion. He'll speak to lawyers where necessary and have their opinion too. But it's a case of fact finding then, in terms of what information can we find out about this claim, and what help does the client need from us?
And these, it's important to note, these can be highly emotive claims, right? If they involve individual insureds. And so part of that discussion can become very intense, particularly when you get to selection of defense counsel. But I think underscoring it is that we deal with very sophisticated counterparties that are accustomed to the fact that these are complex, long-running matters if they are in fact substantive claims.
And I think you're hitting like a really important point. It takes a long time to go through the entire process of a claim. So here we went through the 5 steps of of an insurance policy, and claim is only one step in these 5 steps, but it's probably the one when it occurs is the longest. And that, I guess, it ties back to some of the points you were making, Leanne, in terms of the loyalty vis-a-vis markets in the long run. So 5 steps. I want to really thank our panel here to kind of having guided us through these 5 steps. But before we finish, any closing remark from you in terms of like anything that we've misstepped in between these 5 steps?
No, I think I'd probably just like to summarize and say that actually when you're talking about out loud about some of these steps, they sound really antiquated and, inefficient, and some of them are. But I just don't think we can take the human out of the chain, because this is an individual coverage and it's a specialist coverage that therefore you need a specialist broker for, and therefore you need very experienced and specialist underwriters. And actually, yes, there are some parts of the chain around tax schedules or general administration, but the way I see this whole chain work best is when there's a great relationship between all 3 parties, being the client, the broker or brokers, and the insurers. That's how I see it work best. Robert?
Well, I totally agree. I would also say this is not one and done. So maybe just 2 follow-ups. I mean, once the policy is bound, I would say if it's an overseas client and they happen to be in London, informal meetings are the best. Make time to meet with your partners and discuss anything that might be on the go at the moment at the company. I think those really are some of the best touch points within the cycle, not necessarily the scripted renewal meeting. And then the second point, just follow on, goes to claims. And I think it's that real importance of selecting particularly the primary partner that you have, hopefully for a long-term relationship. Because that immediate reaction that you get when the notification comes in, you as the broker will know what to expect from an Owen Dacey versus someone else.
So invest in your relationship on a long-term basis.
Correct.
Eddie, from your standpoint.
Yeah, it's funny. I think I was going to make exactly the same point as these two. Really, this is a coverage that's for people primarily, and actually the best way to facilitate this life cycle and to continue it on to renewal next year and the year after that is to make sure that there's plenty of contact and communication between all 3 parties, and making sure that there aren't any surprises moving down the chain, and that it's a team that works on all of these things, and actually the communication between the individuals involved in the life cycle of D&O policy is the most important.
So on behalf of the entire Rising Edge team, and I'm sure of our audience, I want to thank you again, Leanne, Robert, Ellie, for your participation today. 2 quick closing remarks. The first one regarding if you want to know a little bit more about claims, I invite you to follow the podcast that our head of claims is actually hosting, Owen Dacey. You can find them on our website. And maybe my personal closing remarks is, as Leanne was saying a bit earlier, a lot of these steps still seem a bit antiquated. So I am just wondering, what the future is going to look like in that space when you consider indeed increased use of AI, increased use of data, increased use of technology, increased use of different type of insurance technology, such as parametric insurance. So what is the D&O insurance going to look like? What is going to be that life cycle maybe in 5 or 10 years' time? But that's for another time. So follow us and come again. Bye-bye.